Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all are having a most blessed day today. It's time for your daily Bible verse, and today we're going to read Daniel chapter 3, verses 25 through 27. He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the fourth looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisers crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. And this was, actually, we read the previous verses, earlier in chapter 3, verses 16 through 18, when Nebuchadnezzar threatens to throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the blazing furnace, and they're like, we don't need to defend ourselves in this matter, They had such faith in God, they're like, the God we serve is able to save us if you throw us into the blazing furnace, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow down and worship your idols, Nebuchadnezzar. They told him off, basically. Not rudely or anything else, just like, well, you know what? We have faith in our God that he's going to save us, but if he doesn't, you know what? It doesn't matter anyway. We refuse to worship your idols, your false gods, And Nebuchadnezzar here, if we read in verses after that, he got really mad, and he's ordering the furnace 7 times hotter than usual, and he's commanding some of the strongest soldiers to tie them up and throw them into the blazing furnace. They're wearing everything as they're throwing them in there, and it says here, King's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot, the flames of the fire killed the soldiers that put them in there, And then, getting to where it is, then Nebuchadnezzar is like shocked. He's like amazed. He's like, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw in the fire? And he's like, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the fourth looks like a son of the gods. He's saying he sees 4 of them walking around unharmed, untouched, and actually, this says the NIV kind of doesn't have this described the best, the NIV translation. It says son of the gods. If you look in the King James Version, it does say son of man. I do think that that's written better and more accurately. That would show that Jesus in his reincarnate form was the 4th one who kept them safe. Incarnate form, however it was, how he was in the Old Testament. You see rather frequently, he's all through the Old Testament as angel of the Lord, everything else. He's all over the Old Testament. That's why when people say the Old Testament is nonsense and no longer applies and should just be skipped over, no, that's a bunch of nonsense because Jesus is written all over it too. And and then Nebuchadnezzar goes, he sees them unbound and unharmed, and he's shouting for him. He's like, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High, come out. And they come out, and all the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors, they're crowding around him like, what the heck's going on here, And then they see the fire didn't harm them, no burns on them. Not a hair of their heads was singed, nor were their robes or clothes, they weren't burnt. There wasn't even the smell of smoke or fire on them. They were completely untouched. And that just shows, they had so much faith in God that he was going to save them, that he was going to keep them safe through it all. And he did. That's what a little faith can do. It can move mountains. And when you're put in such a situation as this, we see this more than once in the Bible. We see this here with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we see this, that they had so much faith in God that he kept them safe and unharmed in the blazing furnace. But we also saw back in Genesis with Abraham with Isaac, the young boy, when God tested him and put him on the altar to be sacrificed for an offering. Abraham had so much faith in the Lord that God was not going to actually have him sacrifice his son, and like we talked about then, was already a prelude, kind of already a foreshadowing of what was to come. It already, in fact, was a gospel in Genesis already. But it just shows you guys, faith can move mountains. And these people had such an attitude here that they were even willing, they refused to worship the idols. They would have rather been thrown in the burning furnace. They're like, even if God doesn't save us, you know what? We'll still be thrown in the blazing furnace rather than worship those idols, those false gods, That's how much faith they had for God. Y'all have a great and blessed day. Jesus loves you. I do too, but not like he does, and I'll talk to you guys soon.